Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases in Normandy's recorded history. Before we start, please leave a comment about where you are watching from and when you heard this story. We want to know where these documented accounts come from and what times of day or night they come in. Military historians say that the psychological warfare operation that started in June 1944 was one of the most intense ever carried out on European soil. Allied troops had crossed the English Channel and set up a shaky base on the beaches of Normandy. One of these groups was a specialized unit based near Caen, which was at the eastern edge of the invasion front. What happened in the small farming area just south of Bayeux over the next few weeks would go down in military history as one of the most disturbing cases of psychological breakdown ever recorded. On June 7th, one day after the first landings, Staff Sergeant Malcolm Hayes joined the British forces. His unit was part of the drive into the interior to take up strategic positions in the Norman countryside. Hayes was 32 years old, which is a lot older than the average infantryman, who was only 26. He had taught math at a well-known school in Sussex before the war. His academic background, excellent vision, and unnatural calmness under stress made him a good fit for specialized training. By 1944, Hayes was thought to be one of the best marksmen in his battalion. He had killed more than 47 enemy soldiers in North Africa and Italy. Military records from the 21st Army Group show that Hayes mostly worked in the Bocage country south of Bayeux. People in the area called it the Bocage. It was made up of old earthen mounds covered in thick plants, which made natural corridors that guided troop movements along set paths. Hayes was a good marksman, and this terrain was perfect for hunting. Patrol logs found at British field headquarters show that Hayes would often be alone in forward positions, sometimes staying still for up to 18 hours. Before he went to Normandy, Hayes had a reputation for being very precise. Other soldiers said he was friendly but distant, a man who kept a professional distance but never seemed cold. Lieutenant Philip Thornton, who had worked with Hayes in North Africa, later told military investigators that Hayes did his job with the calm thoughtfulness of a scientist doing an experiment. Hayes kept very detailed logs of every engagement. He wrote down not only technical details about each shot, but also how he felt physically and mentally, as well as philosophical thoughts about the nature of his work. Hayes wrote in a journal entry from February 1944, while he was stationed in Italy. The scope creates a strange paradox. It brings the target closer visually, but it also makes me feel distant emotionally. Through these lenses, a man becomes a problem of physics, a question of trajectory, wind, and timing. Only after the shot, when I lower the rifle, does he become human again. I wonder if this transition happens too late. A report that was made public by Captain Julian Mercer, Hayes' commanding officer, talked about a strange event that happened on the 12th of June, 1944. Hayes came back from a 20-hour forward deployment looking very upset. When asked about his condition, he reportedly only said that he had seen something impossible through his scope. The report says that Hayes asked to be moved to a different sector right away, but this request was turned down because of the tactical situation. Captain Mercer said that Hayes looked unusually pale and didn't eat for about 36 hours after the event. In the 1,960 seconds, military psychologists looked at the case and came up with the idea that this was the first documented break in Hayes' mental state. In her report, Dr. Eleanor Reeves, a consultant to the Ministry of Defense, said Hayes' request for reassignment represents a significant aberration in his behavioral pattern. Throughout his prior service, he had never once requested a change of assignment, even during the most intense operations in North Africa. Whatever he experienced on June 12th appears to have fundamentally disturbed his equilibrium. The Norman countryside in 1944 was a war-torn place, but it still had the old ways of life that were common in rural France. After the war, people who lived in the area between Bayeux and Saint-Lô told Allied investigators about strange things that happened there. In 1947, investigators spoke with Madame Melisse Fournier, a dairy farmer whose farm was on the British advance route. She said that, for 2 days in a row, she had seen a British soldier sitting still in her hayloft. The way she described him matched Hayes' physical traits. When asked what the soldier was doing, she said, "He was watching something that wasn't there. His eyes never blinked." Lieutenant Howard Richardson of the British Historical Section recorded Fournier's statement, which included more information that investigators first thought was just confusion or exaggeration. She said that the soldier had only talked to her once to ask what day it was. He looked confused when she told him it was June 14th and pulled out a small notebook saying it should be the 19th. Fournier said that the soldier had two identical rifles, which he looked through at different times, as if he were comparing what he saw through each scope. Military records show that Hayes was indeed deployed for reconnaissance at the time of Fournier's encounter, but there is no record of where he was. His unit had written down that he left their position near Tilly-sur-Seulles on the morning of June 13 and came back late on June 15. The lack of surveillance makes it hard to know what Hayes was doing during this important time, which lasted 48 hours and was when, according to Fournier's testimony, he was acting more and more strangely. During the second week of June 1944, Hayes' unit received a lot more sedative prescriptions, according to military medical records. Walter Sullivan, the unit's medic, signed a requisition form that specifically asked for more phenobarbital. It said, "For acute anxiety cases, especially sniper team members who have trouble sleeping," Sullivan's personal log, which was found among his things after he was killed in action on June 22, has several entries about Hayes. The most detailed one, from June 15, says, "Hayes returned from recon today. His physical condition is normal, but his mental state is concerning. He reports not being able to sleep for more than 72 hours. He says his scope is showing inconsistencies in time. I gave him 200 milligrams of phenobarbital. He became agitated when I suggested he rest, saying he needs to keep observing. If the symptoms don't go away, I recommend a psychiatric evaluation." There was never a psychiatric evaluation done. Because operations moved so quickly and there weren't enough medical staff, psychological problems were often ignored unless they made a soldier completely unable to work. Hayes's behavior became stranger and stranger, but he was still able to do his job in the military. In fact, records show that between June 15 and 18, he was given credit for taking out 5 German machine gun positions that were blocking the way of British infantry units near Tilly-sur-Seulles. Corporal Vincent Rawlings, who was Hayes' spotter at the time, later gave testimony that adds to the mystery. In a statement given to investigators in 1946, Rawlings said that Hayes' behavior was mechanically perfect but humanly wrong. He went on to say, "Hayes no longer spoke except to relay technical information. His shooting was more accurate than I'd ever seen, almost unnaturally so. He would call shots that seemed impossible given the conditions, accounting for variables I couldn't even perceive. But what disturbed me most was his habit of narrating his shots before taking them, as if he had already seen their outcome." Rawlings' statement includes a specific example from June 17. "We were watching a German patrol move through a hedgerow about 600 yards away. Hayes suddenly said, 'The officer will stop by that fallen tree in exactly 17 seconds. He will take off his cap with his left hand while looking at his map. The shot will enter through his right temple.' It happened exactly as he described, second by second. When I asked how he could possibly know those details in advance, he just smiled and said, 'I've seen this before.'" On June 18, Hayes was told to keep an eye on an advance near the village of Tilly-sur-Seulles, which was a key point in the battle for Normandy. The Germans were especially tough in this area, and the 12th SS Panzer Division put up a strong fight to hold their ground. Hayes set up his position in the bell tower of a church that had been partially destroyed. He could see German positions about 800 yards to the south. The Church of St. Pierre in Tilly-sur-Seulles was built in the 12th century. The stone bell tower had been through many wars and revolutions over the years, such as the 100 Years' War and the French Revolution. Local histories say that the tower was also used as an observation post in other wars, giving people a great view of the rolling Norman landscape. Hayes' choice of this position was especially interesting because he had asked for it, even though military intelligence had said it was a likely target for German artillery. Captain Mercer's log has a note that questions this choice. Hayes is adamant about the church tower position, even though it is clearly dangerous. He says it has to be this location. When asked, he cryptically said, "It's already happened there." He approved the request because of his past performance and the tactical advantage of the elevation. Even decades after the war ended, The military is still looking into what happened in the next 72 hours. Lieutenant Gordon Winfield, who was in charge of the infantry section that Hayes was supporting, wrote a report saying that radio contact with Hayes was becoming more and more unreliable. The report has transcripts of Hayes's conversations. At first, they are about normal things, like identifying targets and figuring out the wind, but they quickly turn into random thoughts about the space between breaths and windows where they shouldn't be. Samuel Price, the radio operator who kept the communications log during this time, wrote in his personal diary, which was found after the war, that people were becoming more worried about Hayes' mental health. Price wrote, "Hayes is talking nonsense half the time now. He said today that he was watching from 2 places at once. Command is worried, but doesn't want to pull him out because he's so effective. He killed 5 people today, including a German officer at extreme range that no one else could have killed." At 22:13 hours on June 18th, a particularly disturbing transmission was logged. Primary observer reports temporal anomaly. Target appears to be aware of shot before it is taken. Secondary observer confirms identical phenomenon from southern position. The window is narrowing. Convergence at 3. When Lieutenant Winfield asked for more information, Hayes answered in a voice that was unlike his own, with what the log describes as mechanical precision. Both observers occupying same temporal reference point. Paradox requires resolution. Final shot scheduled for 3 hours. After that, only one observer remains. Hayes sent his last radio message at 3 a.m. on June 19th. The transcript says, "I can see myself through my own scope. He's watching me watch him." This is the last shot. Radio logs show that right after this transmission, there was only one shot heard over the open channel. Price wrote in the log, "Sound signature consistent with Mauser K98, not British Lee Enfield. This detail would later be important when compared to the German after-action report." At dawn on June 19th, when a relief team got to Hayes' position, they found his rifle perfectly positioned, his ammunition carefully arranged, and a detailed log of how the weather was affecting the ballistics. Hayes was no longer there. There were no signs of enemy activity. There was no damage to the church bell tower from artillery or small arms fire. Hayes had just disappeared from a place that, according to military rules, should have been impossible to leave without being seen. Sergeant Wallace Denman, who was in charge of the relief team, gave a full report on what they found. The report, which was kept secret until 1967, describes a scene that doesn't make sense. Rifle positioned precisely, bipod deployed, bolt open, as if a round had just been chambered and fired. Spent cartridge on the floor, beside approximately 4 dozen others arranged in a circular pattern. No blood or signs of struggle. Hayes's equipment all present, except for his sidearm and field glasses. Most strangely, we discovered a second sniper log that does not match Hayes's handwriting, containing mirror image calculations of those in his official log. Same targets, same conditions, but calculated as if viewing from the opposite direction. The search that followed took place within 3 miles of the church. There was no sign of Hayes. Records from Germany after the war showed that no prisoner who fit his description had been taken. People in the area said they hadn't seen anything. Staff Sergeant Malcolm Hayes was no longer alive. The mystery grew when Sergeant Denman's team found Hayes' binoculars, which were still focused on a spot about 800 yards south of the church at the edge of a forest. Denman said he saw what looked like a sniper hide that was in line with German doctrine and was partly hidden at the tree line. When a patrol was sent to check out this position, they found proof that it had recently been used. German-made cigarette butts, empty ration containers, and a single spent cartridge case from a 7.92 mm Mauser rifle, which is the standard sniper weapon for the Germans. The German position gave investigators one more piece of evidence that they found very disturbing: a ripped page from a British Army issue notebook that had what looked like ballistic calculations in Hayes' unique handwriting. The numbers were exactly the same as those in Hayes' log in the church tower, but they were called secondary position observations. Major Harold Blackwood and other military investigators talked to a lot of Hayes unit members in July 1944 while the war was still going on. These interviews, which were made public in 1969, show a troubling pattern that started to show up in the days before Hayes went missing. Private Morris Jensen, who had shared a foxhole with Hayes on June 14, said that Hayes had started writing down what he saw in a small leather-bound notebook. Jensen remembered that Hayes wrote all night long, even when it was too dark to see the page. Jensen told investigators, "I asked him once what he was writing, and he just looked at me with a strange smile and said he was keeping 2 sets of notes. One for what he saw through the scope, and one for what the scope saw through him. I thought he was just being cryptic. You know how these sniper types get. But then he showed me the journal. Half the pages were filled with normal observations, wind speed, distance calculations, target descriptions. But the other half, the handwriting wasn't his. It wasn't anyone's handwriting I'd ever seen, and the language, I couldn't read it. But it didn't look like any language I've ever seen." The journal was never found. Other members of the unit have given similar accounts that back up Jensen's testimony. Corporal Rawlings said that one morning he saw Hayes looking into his shaving mirror and moving his lips as if he were talking to his reflection. When Rawlings asked who he was talking to, Hayes is said to have said, "The other observer. We're synchronizing our calculations." Captain Mercer himself gave the most troubling testimony. He told investigators that he had started to worry about Hayes' mental state as early as their deployment to Italy in 1943. Mercer told a story about something that happened while they were working near Monte Cassino. "Hayes came to my tent after midnight, soaking wet even though it wasn't raining. He asked me very seriously if I had ever thought about the possibility that a bullet fired today might hit yesterday. When I told him that he was just tired and thinking too much, he got angry and said he had seen it happen. He couldn't remember the conversation the next morning." Lieutenant Winfield's testimony gave us more information about Hayes' worsening mental state. Winfield says that Hayes had become obsessed with a certain German officer who was often seen at the edge of the forest south of Tilly-sur-Seulles. Hayes is said to have said that the officer was watching back through his own eyes. Radio logs show that Hayes asked for permission to kill this target many times between June 16 and 18, but he was turned down because they were worried about giving away his location. Winfield's statement includes a troubling detail that was left out of his official report. On the afternoon of June 18th, Hayes had radioed with unusual urgency, saying that the German officer was no longer wearing the right uniform. Hayes had said that he saw the officer now wearing British battle dress when he was asked for more information. Hayes' claim that he recognized himself when he looked through his scope at the officer's face was the most troubling. Hayes broke radio rules on June 18th by sending a cryptic message that said, "He's not German. The uniform is wrong. The time is wrong." When asked to explain, Hayes didn't answer for a few minutes. His last authorized message, sent at 23:47 on June 18th, was just one sentence. "I understand now. I'm looking at myself." The mystery of Hayes' disappearance might have been just a footnote in the messy history of the Normandy campaign if it hadn't been for what French civilian contractors found while rebuilding in 1952. While cleaning up the church in Tilly-sur-Seulles, workers found a secret room under the bell tower. They found a group of empty cartridge cases inside that were arranged in a very specific way. The British War Office's official report says that there were exactly 47 cartridges, which matches Hayes' confirmed elimination count before the Normandy campaign. The foreman in charge of the restoration work, François Beaumont, gave local officials a long statement. He said that the stones and mortar that sealed the hidden chamber did not match the original construction, which made it look like it had been done on purpose. The chamber was about 6 feet by 6 feet and didn't seem to have any original purpose in the church's design. Beaumont noted that the cartridge cases had been arranged to form what he described as a perfect star pattern, with lines connecting the points to create a shape like an hourglass. It was even more disturbing to find a group of pictures that looked like they were taken with a rifle scope. The photos, which were developed from film found in the chamber, showed the same place from a few different angles. In each picture, a sniper was in position, and the picture was taken through what looked like the targeting optics of another rifle. The last picture in the series clearly showed Hayes looking through his scope and directly at the camera. A technical analysis of the pictures found a number of strange things that couldn't be explained. First, experts in photography found that the pictures were taken with a special military camera made for reconnaissance, not the kind of camera a soldier would carry around with them. Second, the angle and height of the shots showed that they were taken from the exact spot in the forest where the German sniper position had been found. This spot would have been behind enemy lines and not accessible to British troops at the time. The timestamps on the negatives showed that they were all taken at exactly 3 hours on June 19th, the exact time that Hayes sent his last message and disappeared. In 1953, French officials gave these materials to British military intelligence. Military and medical experts were both involved in the investigation that followed. Dr. Alistair Simmons, a psychiatric consultant for the War Office, looked over the evidence and talked to a few members of Hayes' unit who were still on duty. His findings, which were kept secret until 1967, showed that Hayes had a severe dissociative break, probably caused by long-term stress and lack of sleep. Dr. Simmons' report presents a theoretical construct he designated as combat-induced temporal displacement syndrome, a condition he postulated may arise in individuals experiencing severe psychological stress during activities necessitating heightened concentration and dissociation. He wrote, "The sniper's role requires a psychological state that is unique in combat. The individual must maintain hyper-focused attention while emotionally detaching from the human implications of their actions. In rare instances, this combination of focus and detachment may enable a fracturing of temporal perception, a condition in which past, present, and future become subjectively permeable." Dr. Simmons' report, on the other hand, did not clarify several important parts of the case. Technical experts who looked at the photos said they looked like they were taken from places that would have been impossible to get to because of the landscape and the limits of photography equipment in 1944. Also, a metallurgical analysis of the cartridge cases showed that they had been fired from Hayes' rifle. However, carbon dating showed that they were made in 1943, a year before Hayes went to Normandy. The movie itself was the most confusing part. Kodak experts who were consulted during the investigation found that the film stock was of a type that wasn't made until 1947, 3 years after the events in question. When faced with this anachronism, the War Office's lead investigator is said to have said, "Either this evidence was planted years after the incident, or we are dealing with something that doesn't make sense." As part of a larger study on what civilians went through during the liberation, American researcher Dr. Margaret Holloway interviewed people who lived in Tilly-sur-Seulles in 1961. One of her unpublished findings is a strange story from local farmer Auguste DuPont, who said he saw a British soldier who looked like Hayes on the 25th of June, 1944, 6 days after he officially went missing. DuPont said in his testimony that the soldier was walking along the edge of his property, looking lost, and talking in a way that didn't make sense. When DuPont got close, the soldier supposedly asked what year it was. When the soldier was told it was 1944, he got angry and said it was 1945, and the war was over. DuPont's story says that the soldier had eyes that had seen too much and was carrying papers with strange symbols on them. DuPont also said that the soldier had asked him specifically about the church at Tilly-sur-Seulles, wanting to know if it had happened yet. When DuPont asked what he meant, the soldier allegedly said, "The shot that goes both ways." Before leaving, the soldier gave DuPont a brass cartridge case and asked him to put it in the church tower on the morning of June 19, 1945, exactly 1 year after Hayes went missing. DuPont said that he had thrown away the cartridge case because he thought it was just the ramblings of a soldier who had been through a lot of battles. Holloway's research notes show that at first, she thought DuPont's story was made up, or an attempt to get involved in a local mystery that had become something of a regional legend by the 1960 seconds. But when she showed DuPont a set of pictures of British soldiers from that time, he quickly and without hesitation identified Hayes' service photograph, even though he had never been told the name of the missing sniper. In 1965, British military archivists found a misfiled after-action report from the 12th SS Panzer Division that was the most convincing evidence in the Hayes case. The report, which was written on the 17th of June, 1944, talked about getting rid of a British sniper position in the Tilly-sur-Seulles church tower. The German story says that a skilled marksman from their unit watched the British position for several days before taking a single, perfectly timed shot at 3 hours on June 19th, which was exactly when Hayes sent his last message. The German report has a strange addition. Their sniper said that the British sniper seemed to be looking right at him just before the shot was fired. Even though the German position was hidden and out of Hayes' rifle's effective range, Oberjäger Matthias Haas was the name of the German sniper. It sounds like Malcolm Hayes. There is no record of a German soldier named Matthias Haas in the SS personnel files. This mirroring went beyond just names. British investigators found that the ballistic data in Hayes' log and the calculations in the German report were the same, but in the opposite order, as if each marksman had taken the other's place. The calculations for the trajectory, the adjustments for the wind, and the settings for the elevation were all perfect opposites of each other. The German report has one more detail that investigators found very troubling. The sniper Haas allegedly came back from his mission very upset, saying he had seen himself through the British sniper scope just before he fired. He was put under medical observation, but that night he disappeared from the field hospital. His gear was neatly arranged in his room, including his sniper rifle, which was missing the bolt. Later, historians found out that the 12th SS Panzer Division did send specialized sniper units to the Tilly-sur-Seulles area in mid-June 1944. These units were mostly made up of young soldiers who were chosen for their shooting skills and trained to shoot at Allied officers and other specialized personnel. But divisional records don't mention a sniper named Haas or any successful attacks on British sniper positions on June 19th. The German medical officer who allegedly treated Haas, Dr. Werner Kleinmidt, was captured by Allied forces in July 1944. He was asked about the Haas case while he was being questioned. Declassified in 1973, transcripts of this interrogation show that Kleinmidt remembered treating a sniper who had just come back from a mission near Tilly-sur-Seulles and was in a very bad mental state. Kleinmidt said the soldier was obsessed with the idea that he had switched places with his target and was now stuck in the wrong uniform on the wrong side of the war. Most importantly, Kleinmidt said that the soldier spoke English fluently with what he called a distinctive British accent, even though his military records show that he was born and raised in Munich. That same night, the soldier left the field hospital, leaving behind a notebook full of what Kleinmidt called mirror writing, which could only be read when held up to a mirror. Julian Mercer, a former captain, gave the most disturbing view on the Hayes case when he was interviewed for a secret military psychology study in 1968. Mercer says that Hayes started talking about temporal dislocations a few weeks before the Normandy landings, while they were stationed in Italy. Hayes is said to have said that he could sometimes see events that hadn't happened yet through his scope. Mercer had dismissed these comments as the harmless quirks of a skilled but stressed operator. Mercer, on the other hand, remembered talking to Hayes just a few hours before they left for Normandy. Hayes had never been to Normandy before, but he had described the church tower at Tilly-sur-Seulles in great detail, where he would eventually be stationed. Hayes had drawn a detailed map of the German positions around the town, including defensive positions that Allied intelligence had not yet found. This was even more worrying. Mercer thought that Hayes had just made educated guesses based on standard German doctrine when these positions were later confirmed by reconnaissance. Mercer's testimony from 1968 includes one thing he had left out of all his previous statements. He had gone to Hayes' position in the church tower on the morning of June 18th to give him new information about German troop movements. When he got there, he saw Hayes talking to someone Mercer couldn't see. When asked, Hayes calmly said that he was working with the other observer. When Mercer pointed out that Hayes was working alone, Hayes smiled strangely and said, "He'll be here tomorrow. Or maybe he was here yesterday." The scope makes it hard to be sure. Mercer couldn't explain Hayes' last note in his logbook, which was found in the bell tower position. The last entry, which was made at 2:55 a.m. on June 19th, says, "My target is myself. I am watching from the tree line south of town. I will fire in 5 minutes. Both of us will." The most logical reason for Hayes' disappearance is still that he deserted. The stress of his job, along with the harsh fighting conditions in Normandy, could have caused him to break down. Military records show that many Allied soldiers deserted during the first few weeks of the invasion, which were very chaotic. Some of these soldiers have not been found for decades after the war. In 1970, military psychiatrist Colonel James Harrison looked at the Hayes case and came up with what he called a cascading psychological breakdown, culminating in fugue state. He said that Hayes had been dissociating more and more under a lot of stress, and had eventually come to believe that he was somehow split between two physical locations. The delusion had then led to a fugue state, which is a condition in which a person effectively runs away from their established identity and often creates a new one without remembering their old life. Harrison posited that Hayes, during this fugue state, had abandoned his role and assumed a new identity, potentially as a displaced civilian. In wartime France, things were very chaotic. There were thousands of refugees on the move, and paperwork systems were a mess. It would have been easy for one soldier to go missing. Harrison said that in the years after the war, there were a number of cases of military deserters living under fake names. This made this theory more believable. This explanation, though, doesn't explain the physical evidence found in the church tower, the conflicting witness accounts, or the strange German report. How did Hayes get away from the fortified church tower without being seen if he just ran away? How could he have set up the cartridge cases and taken the pictures? And what do the Germans say about killing a sniper at the exact moment of Hayes' last transmission? In 1969, British military officials officially closed the Hayes case. For administrative purposes, his status was changed from missing in action to killed in action. His name is on the Bayeux Memorial, with the names of 1,800 Commonwealth service members whose graves are not known. The official reason for death is just combat operations. The investigation's official end didn't do much to clear up the main questions about Hayes' disappearance. The mystery has only grown deeper over time, as new evidence has come to light from time to time that goes against what the authorities say. A retired French police officer named Robert Lefebvre came forward in 1977 with an interesting story. He was a local constable in a village about 20 miles from Tilly-sur-Seulles in July 1944 when he found a British soldier who was lost and didn't have any identification or unit insignia. The soldier said he was Malcolm Hayes, but he couldn't give his service number or unit information. The doctor said there were no physical injuries, but the patient was very confused and might have had amnesia. Lefebvre's records show that the soldier had been held for a short time before being sent to a British field hospital. But British military medical records from that time don't show any patients who fit this description. It seems that Lefebvre's official report to the French gendarmerie was never sent to British authorities. Lefebvre remembered that the soldier had only one piece of military gear, a rifle bolt that he wouldn't give up, even when he was sleeping. The soldier apparently said, "It's the only proof that I'm real," when asked about it. During renovations to the rebuilt church in Tilly-sur-Seulles in 1995, workers found a rusted rifle bolt inside the cornerstone. A metallurgical analysis showed that it came from a Lee Enfield sniper rifle, the exact model that Malcolm Hayes was given. The bolt had damage that looked like it had been hit by a bullet going very fast. The serial number was also the same as that of Hayes' issued weapon, which was said to have been found in the bell tower in 1944 without any damage. In 1947, when the building was being rebuilt, the cornerstone with the bolt was put in place. The church records show that most of the people who attended the ceremony were from the area and that no British soldiers were officially present. Marcel Dubois, the mason who sealed the cornerstone, wrote in his personal journal that a tall Englishman with haunted eyes had come to see him on the morning of the ceremony and given him the rifle bolt and a sealed envelope, asking that both be put inside the cornerstone. Dubois had done what was asked, but he had opened the envelope first. He found a single sheet of paper inside, with what looked like ballistic calculations and a short note written in both English and German. The note said simply, "The observer and the observed. Two sides of the same moment. The shot that never ends." In 2002, when British military records were being digitized, the Hayes case took a turn for the worse. A reconnaissance plane took a picture of the area around Tilly-sur-Seulles about an hour after Hayes' last message on the 19th of June 1944. With better digital analysis, two people could be seen in the picture, one in the church tower and one at the edge of the forest to the south. Even though they are far apart, they both seem to be in the same position, aiming their rifles at each other and looking through their scopes at each other. The Ministry of Defense's image analysis experts looked at this picture using advanced enhancement methods that weren't available during the first investigation. Their report, which was secret but partly leaked to military historians in 2007, says that even though the original image was low resolution, both figures seemed to be wearing the same uniforms and carrying the same gear. The analyst's conclusion that both figures have the same posture and dimensions, which means they are the same person, was the most troubling. We still don't know what happened to Staff Sergeant Malcolm Hayes. His case is an oddity in military records, a strange footnote in the brutal math of war, where losses are usually clear and can be explained. People can't explain what happened in that Norman church tower in the early morning hours of the 19th of June 1944. Some experienced snipers who have looked into the Hayes case say that scope psychosis is a condition that can happen when a marksman spends too much time looking at people through magnified optics. Watching another person without them knowing you're watching them, along with the godlike power to end their life with a single motion, is a psychological burden that few people can understand. In a 1983 interview, Master Sergeant Clarence Wilkins, a sniper instructor with the U.S. Army's Advanced Marksmanship Unit, talked about this phenomenon. Looking through the scope, you're both detached from and intimately connected to your target. You see their faces, their expressions, and the moment they realize they're about to die. Some snipers say they feel like they're in two places at once, their own body and the body of their target. It's a unique psychological stress that can change how we see things in ways we don't fully understand. According to this theory, Hayes just couldn't handle the pressure of his job. The mirroring he experienced, seeing himself through his own lens, signifies the complete dissolution of the psychological barrier, separating the observer from the observed, the killer from the killed. Hayes had somehow felt like both of them right before he killed someone. Military psychologists who looked into the case in the 1,960 seconds suggested a more clinical explanation. Hayes was very sleep-deprived and had what would now be called acute stress disorder. He either left on his own after having a psychotic break, or, more likely, he killed himself on purpose, but it wasn't reported correctly because of the chaos of the ongoing battle. People said that the arranged cartridge cases in the photos were either elaborate plans for his suicide or evidence that had been tampered with by people who weren't known. People said that the German report was wrong because of a translation error, or on purpose. But these logical explanations don't fully explain the timing coincidences, the names that are the same, or the two people who were caught in the reconnaissance photo. Some parts of the Hayes case are still hard to explain in a normal way. In 1967, a historian from Bayeux interviewed an old Norman farmer who said he had seen a British soldier near Tilly-sur-Seulles in the summer of 1944. The farmer said the soldier looked confused, kept checking his watch, and mumbled about being in the wrong time. When the farmer offered to help, the soldier asked, "Is it still June 19th?" When the farmer said it was actually July 3rd, the soldier seemed relieved, but then upset, saying, "Then I've been gone for 2 weeks, but I haven't fired yet." The farmer's story has one last detail that investigators found very troubling. He said the soldier was carrying a rifle with a telescopic sight, but had removed the bolt action. The soldier is said to have said, "I took it out so I couldn't fire, but it didn't matter." He fired anyway. François Lair, the historian who wrote this account, first thought it was an exaggerated version of events based on rumors in the area about the missing British sniper. Later, while doing research, he was able to look at Hayes' military records and found something that had not been made public. Hayes' rifle, which was found in the church tower, worked perfectly, except for the firing pin being broken. Damage that would have made the weapon unable to fire, even though it looked fine. There are thousands of reports of missing soldiers from the Normandy campaign in British military archives. Most of them have logical, though sad, reasons. Bodies that were never found, men who died in ways that weren't seen, and paperwork that got lost in the chaos of battle. The Hayes case is different from the others because of the strange evidence that he was both there and not there, both watching and being watched, caught in some strange loop of perception. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a cognitive neuroscientist who studied cases of extreme psychological stress during warfare, looked at the Hayes case in 1998 as part of a bigger research project on how people see things differently in combat situations. Her evaluation gives us the most advanced scientific view of the case. Under conditions of extreme stress, sleep deprivation, and the unique perceptual framework imposed by sniper operations, it is possible that Hayes experienced a profound fragmentation of temporal perception. The human brain constructs our experience of time from disparate neural processes. When these processes are disrupted by trauma or extreme conditions, perception of sequential events can become distorted or even circular. Warren suggested what she called a perception loop, which is when a person gets stuck in a subjective experience of the same moment that they see from many different angles at the same time. Hayes wrote about her case. The sniper scope may have served as both the trigger and the framework for this perceptual distortion. The act of looking through the scope at another human, potentially another sniper looking back, created a unique psychological circumstance in which the boundary between observer and observed became subjectively permeable. The church in Tilly-sur-Seulles is still there today. It was rebuilt after the war, but some parts of the original building are still there. People who live near the site say they haven't seen anything strange happen there. People from other countries sometimes come to see the town because of its role in the battle for Normandy, but they don't know about the strange thing that happened in its bell tower. But there are still small hints about the Hayes mystery. Jean-Paul Moreau, the church's current caretaker, says that sometimes visitors to the bell tower have problems with their equipment that can't be explained, like cameras that stop working, watches that stop at exactly 3 a.m., and compasses that spin in strange ways. Most interestingly, Moreau says that on clear days, visitors looking south toward the edge of the forest sometimes say they see a brief reflection, like sunlight on glass, from a place where there are no buildings or cars. Military snipers work in a mental space that most civilians can't understand. They look at life through a magnified lens that makes their targets seem closer while also making them feel more distant. They are in a space between being detached and killing someone close to them. What happened to Malcolm Hayes may have been the most extreme example of this paradox. A man who looked so long and so deeply into the act of killing that he became both the killer and the killed, both the observer and the observed. The last line of Major Blackwood's 1969 investigation summary says, "The Hayes case defies conventional explanation within the parameters of known psychological phenomena or battlefield occurrences." While desertion or death by enemy action remain the most plausible explanations, the physical evidence and witness testimonies introduce elements that cannot be reconciled with these conclusions. It is the recommendation of this investigator that the case be closed administratively, while acknowledging that certain aspects remain unexplained. Blackwood's personal notes, not included in the official report but discovered among his papers after his death in 1983, reveal his private thoughts on the case. After 25 years of military service, including 2 world wars, I considered myself immune to surprise or bewilderment. The Hayes case has shattered that complacency. If even half the evidence is reliable, we are confronted with something that transcends our understanding of reality itself. I find myself now hesitating before looking through binoculars or a camera viewfinder, irrationally afraid of what might be looking back. There is an interesting entry in the Bayeux Church Registry that is dated the 19th of June, 1945, exactly 1 year after Hayes went missing. It says that an unknown British soldier was buried near Tilly-sur-Seulles. The cause of death is a single gunshot wound to the head, which is what a high-powered rifle would do. The entry says that even though the body had been decomposing for a long time, the uniform insignia showed that he was a sniper. The registry says that the body had 2 identification tags on it, which is very strange. Both had the name Malcolm Hayes, but their service numbers were different. One was British and the other was not recognized. It doesn't say where the body is buried, and there is no grave with Hayes' name on it in any military or civilian cemetery in Normandy. People in the area say that the unknown soldier was buried in unholy ground near the edge of the forest south of Tilly-sur-Seulles, which is where the German sniper position was found. But there is no official record of such a burial, and searches of the area since then have not turned up any evidence of a grave. A retired British Army officer doing research for a book on Commonwealth war graves found an odd difference in the Bayeux memorial records in 2010. Malcolm Hayes is listed as missing and presumed dead in action on the official casualty list with a death date of the 19th of June, 1944. The internal registration card that Commonwealth War Graves Commission staff use to keep track of things has a handwritten note that says, "Second memorial listing requested. See also HASSM, German War Cemetery Macabre." There is no such listing in the official records of the German War Cemetery at Macabre, which has more than 21,000 German military burials from the Normandy campaign. But people who have been to the cemetery have sometimes said they saw a marker with the name M. Hass among the rows of crosses, only to find it gone when they go back to the same place. The best epitaph for Malcolm Hayes may not come from military records or official investigations, but from the words of a sniper who served with him. Corporal Frederick Merritt wrote to Hayes' family in Sussex in August 1944, but the letter wasn't made public until 1969. He said, "I can't tell you what happened to Malcolm, because nobody knows. But I can tell you what he told me the night before he disappeared. He said that when you look at a man through a scope long enough, eventually he looks back. He said sometimes he felt like he was on both ends of the rifle at once. I thought it was just the strain talking. Now, I'm not so sure. Whatever happened to Malcolm, I believe he saw something through that scope that changed him, something that made him understand too much about what we were doing. And sometimes, late at night when I'm on watch, I find myself afraid to look through my own scope in case I see Malcolm looking back." Merritt made it through the war, but he had what we now know was severe post-traumatic stress disorder. His medical records, which were made public in 1990, show that he had nightmares in which he saw himself through a rifle scope and couldn't tell if he was the observer or the target. In the end, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia caused by combat and spent the rest of his life in a veterans' hospital in Surrey, where he died in 1972. Maybe the most human part of the Hayes mystery is what it says about identity and perception. At the moment Hayes aimed at another person, it seems like the lines that usually separate people, observers, and killers from each other broke down completely. This experience, whether it was purely psychological or indicative of something more enigmatic, underscores the inherent fragility of human perception and identity. Dr. James Richardson, a philosopher who has written a lot about the ethics of war, said in a 2014 analysis of the Hayes case that it is the ultimate moral paradox of killing from a distance. He wrote, "The sniper embodies the modern technological approach to warfare, clinical, detached, mediated through optical devices that create both visual intimacy and emotional distance." Hayes's experience, whether delusion or something stranger, represents the collapse of this artificial distance. In that moment, he became both killer and killed, both subject and object, trapped in a loop of perception that transcended the moral firewall modern warfare tries to construct. The case of Malcolm Hayes serves as a poignant reminder of the psychological ramifications of warfare, extending beyond mere physical devastation and evident traumas. A more insidious danger lies in the way combat can change how we see things, who we are, and the line between ourselves and others. In the highly concentrated realm of a sniper, where existence teeters on a precipice, and the distinction between observer and target becomes increasingly indistinct with each passing hour spent peering through the scope, the most significant peril may not be the adversary's bullet, but the gradual disintegration of the self. Military records say that Malcolm Hayes was just one of thousands who never came back from Normandy. He is still officially listed as killed in action, even though his body was never found. His name is on the Bayeux Memorial, with others who don't have a known grave, a silent reminder of the unknown fates that await in war. The Hayes case, on the other hand, is a warning about how easily people can lose their sense of self and perception in extreme situations. Long before post-traumatic stress was officially recognized as a mental illness, Malcolm Hayes seems to have gone through a complete breakdown of his sense of self that left behind physical evidence that can't be explained. The visible scars of war have long since healed in the Norman countryside, decades later. The hedgerows that used to hide German machine guns now peacefully separate green farmland. The church in Tilly-sur-Seulles has been restored, and its bell tower now offers views of rolling hills that are no longer dangerous. But under this calm surface, The land holds memories, and maybe even secrets that have not yet been solved. For those who study the psychological effects of war, the Hayes case is a very extreme example of what can happen when a person is forced to kill in a planned way. Most people who have been in combat show more obvious signs of trauma, like nightmares, flashbacks, and feeling numb emotionally. Hayes' apparent disintegration of self signifies a more profound phenomenon, an utter collapse of the demarcations that distinguish observer from observed, past from present, and self from other. Hayes' case shows how war can change not only landscapes and bodies, but also how people see things. He may have deserted, died in battle, killed himself, or gone through something that is hard to understand. The mirrored calculations, impossible photos, and duplicate identification tags that were left behind show us a mind that could no longer keep the fake line between killer and killed. The church bell in Tilly-sur-Seulles rings every hour, just like it has for hundreds of years. People who live nearby say that sometimes around 3 a.m., the bell seems to ring an extra time, but there is no visible reason for it. People who have heard it say it sounds a little different from the usual toll. It sounds a little flatter, like it's coming from a little farther away or maybe from a different time. A group of paranormal investigators who went to the church in 2013 said they caught this ghostly toll on tape. When played at the same time as a recording of the normal bell, the two sounds made a perfect cancellation pattern, which made the sound go away. The group's sound engineers said that this was acoustically impossible unless the second recording was a perfect mirror image of the first in sound. The mystery of Malcolm Hayes is still unsolved. It is one of many loose ends in the tapestry of war that covered Normandy in the summer of 1944. His last shot, whether it was fired or not, aimed at someone else or himself, happened at 3 a.m. on the 19th of June, 1944, or at some other time, continues to ring out. A reminder that there are still parts of war that we can't fully understand or explain. Some wounds never heal because they are not just physical. Some disappearances remain unresolved because what vanished was not merely a body, but something more fundamental, the coherent sense of self that we all take for granted until it's tested beyond endurance. Malcolm Hayes stared into the abyss of war for too long and too deeply. What he saw through his own scope is still a mystery. The fields in Normandy are quiet now. But for those who know where to look and what to listen for, echoes of the past sometimes break through. These echoes are not ghosts or supernatural events, but reminders that our perception of reality is much more fragile and changeable than we want to believe. We may not realize how thin the line is between the person watching and the person being watched, or between the killer and the person being killed. Malcolm Hayes crossed that line and disappeared into the space between moments, leaving behind only questions that can't be answered and evidence that doesn't make sense. That might be his real legacy, not as a soldier, but as a warning about how fragile identity can be when pushed too far and how limited human perception can be. His last shot still echoes through time, reminding us that there are still parts of war that we can't fully understand.